Ready? Okay. Okay, we will now call the meeting to order. The time is 5:03. We will now proceed with item 2, approval of the agenda. That the agenda for the Prescott Heritage Committee meeting of October 25th, 2023 be approved as presented. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Mover Ray, seconder Lee. All in favor? Motion carried. Okay. Declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none? Oh, Louis?
Yeah, not a big one, but I attend that St. John's Church, so not that it really matters.
Does that matter, Lindsay?
So through you, board and committee members, if they feel they have a pecuniary interest, can step away, but that's on the board member to make that decision.
Yeah, I just had to let you know. Okay.
Okay. Item 4.1 is a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. I have a recommendation that reads that the Prescott Heritage Committee minutes dated September 21st, 2023 be accepted as presented. Do I have a mover? Louis? Seconder? Ray? All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, item 5.1 is staff report from Clerk Lindsay Velkamp. This report is for information only. Ms. Velkamp, would you like to speak to this report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report is an overview of the responses that were received from the committee from the first 5 groupings of properties. Those properties included St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, 388 Center Street, 491 James Street West, 590 George Street, and 408 East Street. As previously stated, the Ontario Heritage Act states that a property must meet one or more of the criteria that is outlined in order to designate a property as being of heritage interest. Staff emailed, called, delivered communication to the 5 property owners in order to provide notice of the meeting so they could attend this evening. I do believe we have a few of those property owners here this evening from this first 5 grouping. Each property in the report lists what criteria the committee members felt were met. And so staff put together a visual with a bar graph just showing out of the 9 criteria which criteria were most met. So for example, St. Andrew's Church, the committee felt that 4 out of the 9 criteria were met, with a response of all 4 members saying that yes, those had been met. And then based on those responses, staff are suggesting that this property comes back for further consideration for heritage designation. Also, it's important to note that the Grenville County Historical Society also recommended that this property be designated, but they did make mention that the manse was not to be included. In the previous report, we had broken out the manse, but in this report we have so that the committee could provide extra consideration for that property. I will note that 2 members stated that they agreed with the Grenville County Historical Society that the manse should not be up for consideration for designation at this time. So it would be up to the committee if they would like that property to return for further consideration, or if you would choose to just remove it completely and it would come off the interest list altogether. 388 Center Street, Grenville County Historical Society had recommended, the majority of the members had recommended that this property receive historical designation. And then based on the responses received from the committee felt that 2 out of 9 criteria were met. And again, since the Heritage Act does state that 1 or more criteria needs to be met in order to make a case for historical designation, the committee has the opportunity to move this property forward in order to analyze and develop a clearer consensus on designation at a later date if they choose. 591 James Street West, the Grenville County Historical Society had a unanimous vote not to designate this property. Based on responses from the committee, the majority of the committee felt that 2 out of the 9 criteria were met, which would mean that potentially this property does meet the criteria based by the Ontario Heritage Act to move forward for consideration for designation. But again, that's up to the committee if they wish to continue to review and analyze it, or if they wish to remove it completely from consideration, meaning that it would drop from the interest list as well. The next property was 590 George Street. The majority of the Granville County Historical Society recommended that this property not receive designation. And based on feedback from the committee, the majority of members agreed that 1 out of 9 of the criteria were met. And that is all it takes to designate the property. So again, if the committee wishes to move forward with this property for further deliberation, we can bring it back. Or again, if the committee would like to decide to remove it from the list, that's an option as well. And the last property is 408 East Street. The Granville County Historical Society, the majority of members recommended historical designation on this property. And based on the feedback from the committee members agreed that 2 out of 9 of the criteria were met, which again means that this property could move forward for further consideration should the committee wish to do so. Attached to the report was also the previous report, PHC report 05/2023, which included all the recommendations and feedback from the Granville County Historical Society, so the committee could do that. That's my report. If the committee has any questions.
Ray?
Thank you. I had a question about top of page 10. Regard to 491 George Street West. Is that accurate?
Through you, Madam Chair, I do believe the feedback from the property owner during the open comment period, the owners did say that they did not wish to have the property.
Yeah, that's correct.
Is correct?
We did not wish to.
Okay, thank you.
Does any of the committee members have any questions for Fraser? No? Lee?
I thought Corinne had some questions before we started the meeting.
So through you, Madam
Yeah.
Chair, I think, Fraser, we were going to address the committee first and then.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Addressing me.
No, go ahead, Lee.
Very well addressed, Corinne. Obviously, there was discussion going on when I came in the door, which was before the meeting. And I think, Fraser, it would be helpful if you indicate what is involved, if you haven't already before I got here, before the meeting, what the limitations are and what the expectations are, what you can do if a house is designated or listed, and what you have to do it. Could you do that in 10 words or less?
Madam Chair, through you, if you want me to just lay out a few, you might sort of address some of the concerns right off the bat that any of the property owners might have.
Sure. I just wanted to mention, in order to let everybody have a chance to talk, we're limiting comments to 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. for
Okay?
sure. Okay. So I'll be less than 10 minutes.
Okay.
So my name's Fraser Lashinger, by the way, and I was the chairman of the Heritage Committee for 6 years. And I'm a member of the Historical Society in town. So I've had quite a bit of experience with heritage properties and studying them and analyzing them and working on bylaws and that sort of thing. Very quickly, the act was brought in 1974 to try to protect built heritage, that is buildings, that reflected the history of a community. At that time, a lot of buildings were being demolished in the name of progress and expansion of towns and cities. And the government felt that there was a community interest and stake in preserving the most significant elements of our built heritage for future generations. Now, they recognized that private property owners were involved because they owned most of these buildings. They weren't government buildings, they were private buildings. So they tried in the legislation to balance the interest between the private owner of the property, who happened to live in a heritage building, against the interests of society at large that didn't want to see their history obliterated from the face of towns. They considered that the history of the towns and cities represented through those heritage buildings were what attracted not just people to live in the cities because of the interesting surroundings, but also tourists and economic interests. All of these supported the idea that heritage properties needed to be protected against just the sole decision of an owner of such a property to demolish it because he wanted to put up something more modern or what have you. That there was an interest if these heritage properties could meet certain criteria. And in 2006, the province developed a regulation which laid out the 9 criteria on which heritage designations could be formulated. So, and that's what we've been doing through this whole exercise, having that checklist, yes, no, or maybe, is to see how important individual properties are in terms of the community interest in preserving them, not just the owners. We always think the owners are mostly proud of their heritage properties and would want to keep them in good shape and keep them in a way that represents the history of the place. And so as an example, if a property is designated, it just means that the outside appearance should be kept in keeping with the historic aspects for which it was designated. In other words, if you have a stone house, you shouldn't put vinyl siding on it. If you have a stucco stone house that's designated, usually if you want to take the stucco off, a heritage committee will agree with that, but you have to consult through the town and the staff of the town, which is prepared to then talk to the heritage committee, and they would look at your proposal. There's quite a few stone houses in Prescott. We're a very old town and we have a lot of very old buildings. And some of the owners of those heritage properties have taken the stucco off, and there's no, and they're doing that now at the Forwarders Museum. And there's generally not a problem with that because that's the way they originally appeared. Often the stucco was applied at the end of the 19th century. People thought that looked, nicer. They didn't like the stone. By the end of the 20th century, people thought that stone houses looked much better than stucco houses. So, tastes change over time, but heritage properties need to be, the essence of them needs to be preserved. When it comes to windows and doors, if you have a heritage property that's got very old windows and you want to replace them, if it's designated, you should talk to the Heritage Committee about what kinds of windows would be appropriate. It's a reasonable thing to do. If you look around town, we've got some old houses like the Alpheus Jones House or the Ebenezer Bacon House at the corner of West and Park. In the case of the Ebenezer Bacon, it's a designated house. The people who bought that 25 years ago, their neighbors of mine, I wasn't there then, but they restored the whole house and they put in modern windows that are all thermopane and everything, but they look historic because they have the mullions that they look like they have panes of glass, but they're actually just a big piece of glass, and they look like they have 6 panes over 6 panes, which is very historic and what the original house would have looked like. So you can opt for that. What the Heritage Committee might not agree, or probably wouldn't agree to, would be to put in a modern plate glass window into a 200-year-old house that looks very modern, because that would detract from the appearance from the street. Now, if you want to do that in the back of the house where that's your back property, no one's allowed onto your property, even if it's designated. So you could put in modern windows in the back and no one would really complain about that. It's what it looks like from the street. You want to keep the heritage aspects to the public because that's what everyone else sees. Your house is your private dwelling, but the face of your house is what adds to the texture of the town. People drive through the streets, they see historic looking houses and they say, isn't this a beautiful neighborhood? Look at these beautiful old houses. If the houses have been degraded with inappropriate modifications, it just detracts from the whole heritage aspect. So that's what the legislation is trying to protect. It's not telling people what colored paint you put in your kitchen, what kind of cupboards you put, nothing. You can do a completely modern kitchen in a heritage house designated. You can put in modern bathrooms, the whole thing. There's nothing in the legislation that says you can't touch that. You don't even have to go to the committee. You might have to go to the town to get a building permit to do some modification, and they will look at what is involved. But generally speaking, the whole inside of the house, you can make it the way you want it. It's just that street view, which is what the Heritage Act is trying to safeguard. So I hope that helps in terms of specific questions that I've heard asked about, can we keep this or that? There's one exception, and we only have one house in Prescott that has a designated interior element, and that is the Albert Whitney house on Dimble Street. You might notice it. It's across from the tennis, the lawn bowling court club, and it's all boarded up. But that house used to belong to a man who had a lot of money, and he put in beautiful woodwork. He was an associate of J.P. Weiser here in Prescott, the distiller. And Albert Whitney put in this beautiful woodwork. So when it was designated, a separate element was the protection of the entrance hallway and the staircase, this grand staircase that, you don't see anymore. And so that was protected. Unfortunately, the house was abandoned, vandals got in, they set it on fire, and all that wood was destroyed. So it sort of shows you there are circumstances where even heritage protection will not save a house from destruction. So that's my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Fraser. Okay, so now we'll have comments from the property owners. We'll just go in the same order that Lindsay had the slides in. So Susan and Marilyn, do you have any comments? No? No? Okay. That was St. Andrew's Presbyterian.
Actually, I have a question. So once they get designated as heritage property, can you apply for grants or whatever if you need to do some maintenance or restructuring?
Do you know,
Is
Fraser?
the funding available?
Oh,
So through Madam Chair, so through the community improvement program, there are grants for historical properties. We added that, I believe, back in 2018 and have enhanced that as part of the program that we passed this year. So I will follow up with some additional information. There's also information right on our website in terms of what you can apply for.
Okay, super.
okay, so the next property is 388 Center Street. Do you have any comments?
Yes, there is some problems with the town with these heritage houses. Like they put snow all the time up over my windows. My windows are 150 years old. How can I stop this? Like I have phoned, complained, done everything, put up snow fence, they knock it down. They're actually hurting the house. The same as the front, they put the concrete down from the road, like from the sidewalk towards the house. So the water actually runs into the basement. And this is also causing trouble in the house. But like no matter what I say to the township, they basically like drop dead.
Matthew, you had a comment?
And so I will follow up with you after this meeting. This isn't the place for
This is a
that.
serious problem, like the snow especially. They pile it all on Devil Street, right up against my doors, my windows, everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
The other thing is, like I was saying about, you know, if you're just doing the outside of the house, that's one thing. But you need that in writing in case you have to pass that on to the next person. Because most heritage houses, I don't think work that way, but to make it heritage, to preserve the house, you can do just like one or two little things, heritage, I know that. But if you're just doing the outside of the house, I wasn't told that. Now, is that true? It's just the outside of the house?
Madam Chair, through you. This is what we're talking about like tonight in the meetings is
I'm
just.
sorry, I have an awful time, I need to
Okay.
minutes.
The public consultations at this point are just to determine if there's going to be a list of certain properties that the town might want to move forward on to designate. At that point, if the town wants to designate a property, they're gonna have to draw up a bylaw. And so a bylaw will have to be drawn up by the town staff, and it will list the reasons why the property is being designated.
Okay.
Now, in that list, and the town will consult, because when they do bylaws, they have to consult with the public that are affected by the bylaws, right, Matthew?
Correct.
And so there'll be another opportunity to examine in detail what the elements are that the town wants to protect. And so that would spell out very clearly that if it's just the front facade of your house that they're wanting to protect, that is what the legislation and the bylaw will seek to protect in the future. We can't really talk in the abstract at this point. What we're doing in terms of this analysis is indicating which are the elements we think are the significant ones. Was it associated with a historic person, or is it the style of the architecture, or is it the way that it looks on the street in relation to its neighbors? These are all individual criteria, but those would be spelled out in the bylaw and none of the others. If the others weren't considered important, they wouldn't be included in the bylaw.
Okay. So the next house is 491 James. You guys have anything to comment on the property?
No.
No? Okay. And I guess that's all that's here from the first. Oh, are you? Okay. Are you here from the first five?
Yeah, 461 Center Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's,
So I've got information to come here, that's why that's part of it.
So for you, the Mance, we didn't really review because it was separate, so.
Okay.
So that would have been included with the first groupings.
oh, okay. Okay, go ahead.
Well, that's what I'm just seeing, because it just got passed. Am I included in that, considering you just passed just for the church?
Sure, that's up to the committee to decide. So our understanding is it was part of the church. It has now been sold. The committee, the Mance and the church were included on the interest list. But now with a different owner, the committee could review it separately. So it's up to the committee if the committee would like to, receive more information. But there was no, I believe in the original 2013 report and the feedback from the Granville County Historical Society, there wasn't a lot of mention made to the actual Mance. It was mostly around the church. So if the committee wishes to, separate it and discuss that as a property for maintaining on the designation or designating that property, it's up to the committee. Or if they wish to, take it off the list altogether, again, that's the committee's decision.
Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, through you, is there some reason you want the house designated, or would you prefer not?
I just thought that was mine, not including the church and stuff like that. That's why I was recognizing it was more towards the church itself. I'm either or I'm doing some renovation myself right now. That's why I was
Obviously.
kind of concerned of being put into heritage and seeing what all aspects of it, since it already
I think if I may, what caught you, because I went around and took pictures of all these ones that we had on the list, and at the time, the number for the church and your house was one number. So it isn't anymore. We have the church and we have your house, and it was specific to the church that we were looking at. So if the committee in discussion felt that, well, yeah, your house is of interest too, then we could add it to the list, but I have no inclination to do so unless you specifically.
No, I'm
Happy.
at the moment, I'm equal, so it's just, I just thought buying property was something about four, so, but I definitely, put the church and everything else going, but if mine comes down the road to be, designated or talked about more of, I'll just appreciate the invite and stuff there as well. So.
Okay, well, one thing I will say is I compliment you on the amount of money that you're spending on that basement and the porch. that's the same outfit that did my roof that's working at your place. I was well pleased with their work, and so good on you for working on an old house like that.
So is that everybody from the first group?
No, so through you, Madam Chair, I believe this is 408.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah, I wasn't able to be here at your last meeting.
Yeah, that's
so
why I didn't know, yeah.
Reading minutes, and I wasn't able to listen to the recording. I'm mindful in the minutes, it kind of collapses carriage house and interior woodwork, which I'm guessing maybe you're meaning the main house. You know, there's one area for carriage house. I'm not really clear on that part of it. And my interest would be, you know, what the intention is designating, which it sounds like that's somewhere in the future. I'm mindful that we have the houses for sale at the moment. And I'm also mindful of what we need to disclose, any potential owner, with this consideration. It wasn't in our interest when we purchased it to have it designated, because of the work we wanted to do, and being a bed and breakfast.
So through you, Madam Chair, the comments that are being made, I believe, are taken from the minutes, and it was based on discussion about and the committee can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was just a conversation about how lovely the woodwork was inside. I don't know if it was a comment so much if that's what would potentially be designated. So I'll leave that up to the committee to expand on if I'm incorrect or if they wish.
Anybody have any comments?
Well, for me, given the nature of the house, things have been held there, and a number of us have attended things there, and I know myself and Ray, who commented on the last meeting, were both struck by the quality and the beauty of the woodwork on the inside of the house. Now, honestly, I haven't been in the carriage house, so I have no idea what's in there, but it's a unique carriage house for the town. The history of the carriage house, with the gentleman's Rolls Royce and his chauffeur over top, that's a story right there that is probably unique to the town. So what we will discuss or decide going forward, I guess, is up to people feel.
Just, yeah, that's fine. I understand you've got your process. And Lindsay and I chatted before in terms of timeline, et cetera, what the anticipated progress you have, so. I
Okay,
just wanted to make sure, because quite honestly, the carriage house has been, prior to us purchasing it, completely renovated, so inside it's 3 bedrooms. The doors at the front are mock doors. I don't even know if they were original doors to the carriage house. But I also appreciate the story because that's the story to make up that property. So it's just mindful when I chatted with Lindsay, inside the main house, absolutely, there's a lot of qualities and oak paneling and other things, but Lindsay also referenced that this sounds like at this point in time, it's more an external view, but I'm mindful, again, being an active business, what that impact may be, and also because it's on the market, what the disclosures we may need to do.
right, okay. Okay, so you guys are free to go now. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Joe.
Thanks for the work you're doing.
Now is not the time.
Pardon?
Now is not the time, so I'll
Okay.
contact you.
Is it time?
Yes.
So through you, Madam Chair.
Yes,
I just wanted to let the committee know that we have contact information for all the property owners. Staff will continue to work with and communicate with the homeowners. So anytime their property is coming back, they will be invited to attend and comment. Also, this is an opportunity if the committee has any properties, based on the feedback we received, it looks like all the properties the committee would like to move forward to deliberate on further, and potentially the Mance is to come off that list. Is that the feeling around the table, or?
I don't remember saying anything about the Mance, actually. It was all call it church because we knew it was separated.
Yeah, it was brought up, and my feeling is it's not. It shouldn't go forward. That's just my feeling.
Sorry, do you, Madam Chair, is that the feeling of the entire committee?
Yeah,
The gentleman's going forward with his renovations, which look a lot better than what it was before, right? So,
What we'll do is we'll bring those 5, continue to move forward so that they can be reviewed for further consideration.
So the voting would be 5 votes.
For no recommendation
Well,
for the.
5 different properties, 5 different votes, as opposed to 1 vote covering all 5, right?
And then again, if there's any comments, feedback or improvements that the committee would like to see in the process, now that you've kind of gone underway with the first time, please let staff know so that we can make those so it's an easier process going forward.
I just have a question, Madam Chair. The lady for 388 Center Street, from the 2 meetings she's been here, she really doesn't want her property, it's designated. And I know all the research that you put in, the work you put into explain why they should be. But if owner really, really doesn't want it, do we just walk away and say, okay, we've done our best, or what's your recommendation?
Well, Madam Chair, through you, the act says that the municipality has a responsibility to protect its heritage properties so that the owners don't have a veto on heritage designation. They are consulted. Municipalities try to work with them to get a mutual understanding if a property is going to be protected, the reasons why it's being protected and what's being protected, the front facade. But the legislation, the spirit behind and the letter of the legislation is that town or a city, town council, because it's the municipalities through their legislative body. So the council has to make the decision on a bylaw to designate. They have to protect the interests of the property owner and the town. So there's a balancing you have to do. You have to balance the private interest versus the public interest. You can't just say, oh, the owner of the property is objecting, so we won't do anything. Your responsibility as a legislature is to balance under your legislation. You have to look to the Ontario Heritage Act and the regulations and say, what are we obligated to do if a proposal is made to designate it? Well, we have to listen to the owner, we have to listen to the experts, and we have to try to pull together a decision. And that's a political decision.
Yeah, I think in her case, though, it's a little bit tricky because half her house on the Dibble side, like the wall's gonna give out any day. I mean, or any month or whenever. Like there's no roof or anything, and hopefully it's leaning in and it goes in, right? I mean, that's the best hope for it. And then in knowing that she's been trying to sell the house a couple of times, so I see it from this point of view, but I also see it, through her point of view. And then I can't sell the house. She's probably just scared that she's stuck with the front facade. What would happen to the side facade where there's no roof? Would she be stuck with having that wall, or could she ever go to the building department and say, look, it's just unsafe. It's got to be torn down where there's no roof in that section?
Well, again, if you're going to approach, first of all, if you take a decision, this is a candidate for designation, then when you're crafting the bylaw, you look at carefully what elements you want to protect. If you deem it that the back part of the property is in danger of falling down, that it's unreasonable to demand that be protected, you would just then have a bylaw that protects what faces onto Center
So just the
Street
front, okay.
and the corner of the main house.
Sure.
Because I know the history of the house, and the thing along Dibble Street was added about 25 years later from the original. So the original building was built in 1834 that faces on Center Street, the main house.
Yep.
And then that whole wing that went back and then another wing that formed a courtyard were built about 15 years later. And they were used for rental purposes. They were always rental properties. The bank itself was in the main house. That's where the bank vault is in. And the main house was a bank for about 20 years, Prescott's first bank, the Merchants Bank. So it's, significant on that score. And there's other reasons why the whole building is significant, because we have 2 generations of doctors living there, and they were very well-known doctors, Dr. McPherson and Dr. Tor. So that, there's a lot of elements there that have to be considered. But you don't have to, at this point, decide on those kind of details. You can just say, yes, it's still a candidate. So we'll work on those as we go through the process of crafting a bylaw.
No, Roger, you're right.
Okay, so continuing with the agenda. Item 5.2 is a staff report from Clerk Lindsay Melcamp. This report is for information only. Ms. Melcamp, would you like to speak to this report?
Madam Chair. Before you use the second grouping of properties that were reviewed, they were submitted to the Granville County Historical Society for comment. Those are included in the report. The second grouping of properties include 177 Dibble Street East, 147 Dibble Street West, 175 James Street West, St. John's Anglican Church, 305 Center Street, and 392 Edward Street. Similar to the last 5 properties, notice of meeting were sent along with the FAQs this time, sent to the property owners. They were sent by mail and also delivered to their doors. Fraser is here to provide comment on the properties. If it's okay with the committee, I can go through a slideshow, and if Fraser would like to provide comment or answer any questions one by one, if that works. First property under review is 177 Dibble Street East. The unanimous recommendation from the Granville County Historical Society was no designation. You'll see on the screen the breakdown of the yes, no, maybe categories for the checklist that the committee has taken home as well for homework. I'm not quite sure if there's any questions on this property for Fraser.
Anybody?
Not for me.
No? Okay.
Next property is 147 Dibble Street West. The unanimous recommendation from the Granville County Historical Society on this property was also no designation. Again, on the screen, you'll see the criteria that the Historical Society felt it either met or did not meet.
We don't have this one. We don't have the, the second half of the choices at the Granville Historical Society
Sorry, 3.
in your
packet.
And
Okay. I'm sorry, I thought I had included as an attachment. If I missed it, I'll be sure to send it out to the committee after.
Okay.
And I can do that going forward with the other reports as well.
okay, thanks. Any comments on this house?
That house is beyond renovated inside and out, so it's way past.
Thank you, John. I guess I'm wondering why we're even considering property that has been already considered by the Heritage Historical Society, and they said no.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so these were all on the listed. So we're now kind of going through getting the feedback from the Historical Society to say, should it be considered for designation, yes or no? And if it's not, does the committee agree? In which case, our recommendation would be to remove it. So, but I think we still have to do the analysis to say, because it is on the listed and we need to make a decision one way or the other to either move it to designation or drop it from the list. So that's, I think, what we're attempting to achieve.
So that second term, second designation, which we refer to as just listed property, right?
Right.
That's no longer going to be something.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so the government of Ontario made a change to the legislation where now you can't leave them on in perpetuity. You have a 2-year limit. And so, basically they said everything that's currently on your list, you need to go through, figure it out by December of 2024. And so that, that's what we're doing now. And then basically by the end of that list, we should have made a decision on all of these to either move it forward for designation or remove it from the list. Because once you put it on the list, you have 2 years in which to make a decision. Once the end of the 2 years hits, you can't put it on again for 5 years. So, so I think that's where, by the end of 2024, we should have nothing on the list at that point, unless we're considering moving it forward for consideration, because you don't get to touch it for basically 7 years.
Okay, the next house, property.
The next house is 125 Main Street West, St. John's Anglican Church. And the unanimous recommendation from the Grenville County Historical Society on this property was for heritage designation.
Any comments? Louis?
I just have a comment, and the only reason is not only because I attend there on Sundays, but I've given my time to volunteer to just do repairs there. The one worry that this church has had from the people that attend is that it's an older population that attend. Like my wife and I are like almost 2 generations apart from people sitting beside us, right?
Yeah.
And the one worry is that it's almost like a ticking time of like, how long will this church, exist, right? And this church belongs to a bigger group of the Anglican Society. The reason I bring that up is in traveling Canada, just recently, just seeing some family in Halifax, I was enlightened to see a church that was it wasn't made into apartments, it was made into a restaurant, but everything to do with the church was kept in there. And I said to myself, wow, that's so neat, right? I mean, I'm not saying that we need another restaurant or anything. I'm just thinking, housing or it could be a community center. So the question I have is, if you can answer, because I don't know, is if it does get deemed historical, could say from a development point of view, say to put apartments and whatnot, could that ever be done and alter a bit of the outside? And I'm only saying that because the reality is not a lot of people are attending, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to a church like this, right? Is it just going to sit there and the Anglican Society is going to keep it there as a holding for the real estate, or will they sell it and then maybe the developer can't do anything because he can't alter anything on the outside?
Fraser?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think the way to look at it is currently it's not designated. So, another church in town, St. Mark, is designated.
Yes.
The difference between the two situations is that in the future, if the congregation were to disappear or could no longer afford to keep the church going, the designated church, St. Mark's, would be required to approach the town and say, we've got a problem here. We've got a designation. We've got to do something about the church. We can't keep it going the way it is. And the town would be involved through the council and through the Heritage Committee at that time as to determine the future of the church. The designation merely gives the town the ability to intervene before the bulldozers are brought in. Because if it's not designated, they can just walk in and apply for a demolition permit, and it could be gone in 2 weeks, and the town wouldn't have anything to say about it. The way the previous legislation was constructed, if you had the property on the list, but it wasn't designated, and a person or a group wanted to demolish it, the owners wanted to demolish it, they had to give written notice to the town, and then the council had 60 days to make a decision whether they were going to designate it or let it go. So in this case, with St. John's, I was thinking, if that was given a designation, all it does is, in the future, give the town a say in what will happen to that property if the day comes when the congregation can no longer support it and say they want to turn it into housing or what have you. The town would say, okay, it's designated, the Heritage Committee has to be consulted, and heads would, gather around and discuss all the different options. And the town would have a say in how the future of that building would be determined. So it's a way of preserving the public interest by having a designation, as opposed to taking the view that, well, because they look on shaky financial grounds, maybe a designation would be disadvantageous to them. It actually wouldn't change much because, if 20 years from now they wanted to tear it down, the only thing a designation would require, they have to go to the town council and get permission to do that. Because the town council has it within its power to revoke a designation. Now, we had an example a couple of years ago. Crane House was a designated property owned by the Catholic Church. They wanted to demolish it, and the town had the opportunity to say, no, you can't do that right away. We're going to see what we can do. We had consultations on it. We refused their request for taking off the designation, because once you take it off, then they could have applied immediately for a demolition permit, which is what their intention was. And we found a contractor who was willing to restore it and turn it into condos. And so the building that's the Crane House at the corner of Dibble and Edward Street. And now we've got, a beautifully restored house. It's been saved by the contractor who did a beautiful restoration, and it's now, well, they're not condos, I understand they're rentals, producing lots of tax revenue for the town. Everyone's happy. So you can't always determine in advance how those things are going to turn out. The designation just gives the town the opportunity to be involved in any future decisions.
Oh, sounds good, sir.
Lee, did you have a comment?
Yeah, there's, through you, Madam Chair, there's a variety of instances of churches in cities that I've seen pictures of. As a matter of fact, Fraser and I discussed one in Montreal, I think a couple of years ago somewhere, that have been made into residences. And the idea is, if you're looking at the picture there, the view from the street from, in this particular case, say from the north side and from the east side, you wouldn't see any difference at all. But if you were to look at it from north side and west side, but if you were to look at it from the east side, you'd see that there's a considerable addition that's been put on there that is residence, and the residence continues through into the church. You just don't notice it from the outside. The unfortunate thing with St. John's is they sold the hall off.
Yeah.
So that severely limits what you can do on the side of that. If they hadn't sold the hall off, there are some tremendous possibilities, I would say, with that property. But you can, just because it's designated doesn't mean somebody can't apply to put an addition on it for a purpose and use the interior of that church to that purpose, as long as the committee finds that the integrity of the outside is maintained enough to satisfy the criteria. So things can be done without losing the building.
No, you're right. And the hope is that in the next 20 years, it continues to be a church. I mean, they do outreach programs to rent the interior hall. That in the last month, they've done considerable amount of stonework with the same contractor that did the Catholic church next door. So the investments are there. I know the wardens, they'll do anything right till their death to keep this church in good shape, as they usually do, right? It's just, you answer the questions really well, and now I kind of get more of understanding, and it's nice to see that some things are kept intact, right? So
Well, not only that, and Fraser, you can, if I may, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but that church in the early days was not the steeple, a siding for ships on the river. They didn't always have the buoys and stuff that we have today, and as ships were coming down the river as it was, they sighted on various things on land, and the steeple of that church was a sighting from, so that's just another historical.
yeah, it's not the original church that burned down, but it is a continuation. So it just turned 200 years a couple of years ago.
No, never burned down. The
Oh, sorry.
Anglican? No.
Yeah, there was a back church in the,
St. Andrews burned down.
yeah, no, but in the back, there was an original church in there and then they built this
It was
one.
wood, yeah.
Yes, but so ceremoniously, it's 200 years now. It just
The
celebrated.
congregation is too.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat, right? That's it for me, Madam Chair.
Okay, next property?
The next property is 305 Center Street. Grenville County Historical Society unanimously recommended heritage designation for this property. And the criteria they felt were met are there on the slide as well.
Okay, does anybody have any comments about this property? Okay. Next.
And the last property is 392 Edward Street. And the Granville County Historical Society recommendation was, the majority of members recommended heritage designation on this property. And again, the criteria they felt were met are there on this slide.
Any comments on this property?
It was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was just heavily renovated, no, for apartments recently?
The Hutchison House?
Yeah.
I think a lot of interior stuff has been done. The house itself, the front part of the house is the original, the stone part. And it's really much as it looked when it was built. There's very little alteration to that appearance. So in terms of a designation, it would, I assume, it would depend on how the Heritage Committee wanted to craft the bylaw, if they decided to make this one. Which elements would be preserved, but to me, the obvious ones are the principal entrance, the front door, the windows, the facade, and just the look of the house, that sort of thing.
Especially the type of windows, you're right. Okay, no, I'm only mentioning that because when you drive by, you see 6 new gas meters installed on the side, right?
Yeah.
So I just thought maybe
Yes.
put it into apartments.
Yep.
Cool.
Any other comments?
That building has changed. I'm sure you remember when Bud Appleton's funeral home was there and there was a large one-story, well, I shouldn't say large, but a very long one-story addition at the back of it that held his ambulance and purse and whatever else he had. And then there was a 2-story addition between the original part of the house and that. And then Chris Slater bought the property and he did extensive renovations inside. He tore out the main stairway that joined it to the second floor and knocked some walls out. So essentially the downstairs was 2 big viewing rooms for his funeral home. And when the spa purchased it, they tore off everything in the back, the 2-story addition and the single story, and put the 2-story addition that's on there now. And it was renovated for their business. Then it was renovated for several small businesses. And now it's being renovated for apartments. So as far as the interior of this building and additions to it go, it really shouldn't be of any interest to this committee at all. Fraser's right, it's just the exterior of the original building.
If I could, Madam
Yep.
Chair. The other point about this house is that it's situated on a corner where right opposite is another Georgian style house, which is the Sir Richard Scott House, which is of a similar epoch and is a National Historic Site. Kitty Corner is a Crane House, which is a designated. So you've got a corner there where 3 of the 4 corners are occupied by these wonderful heritage houses. So it gives a sense to people going, and it's on Prescott's one of its main streets. So people driving into town off the 401 heading downtown, when they get to that corner, they can sort of see, hey, this town is quite historic. Look at all these beautiful old buildings. So it's a wonderful advertisement for the heritage of the whole town because it's sitting there, those 3 houses. Now, there used to be another stone house on the other corner. It burnt down. And that was a Jessup house. So it's unfortunate that happened, but that happened like 50 years ago. And they put up those modern apartments. But 3 of the 4 houses on that corner or go back to the earliest days of Prescott and our beautiful houses. So, you know, that's a good reason to designate it, apart from all the other reasons. You know, Bruce Hutchison was a very prominent journalist in the 20th century. He was born there. Anyway, it's a very compelling case for designation, but we'll see what.
A little off topic, Fraser, but the one that burned down, was that a hotel at one time?
No, it's called the Woodfield House. It was built by the Jessups into two side-by-sides, a stone house that had the two daughters were married and they each had half the house sort of thing. But as I say, it was an apartment house later, and then it burned down back in 1960 or so.
Hotel of Block South then?
Pardon me?
Was a hotel of Block South?
Yeah, the Revere House.
Okay.
The time was all that when it burned.
Okay, so now moving on to new business. Item 6.1 is a verbal update from staff regarding the resignation of a committee member. Lindsay Velkamp will speak to the item.
Madam Chair, we did receive a resignation from board member Ruby Nixon. The Ontario Heritage Act does state that the Heritage Committee is to be comprised of 5 people. We wanted to bring this forward to the committee, just seek motion to put out a call for another member or members.
I mentioned to Matthew, you know, in the past, somebody that I thought would be a good candidate, and I emailed that person after I got the notice that we were having reservation. I haven't heard anything back. I did invite her to the meeting tonight, but I don't know whether she's at home or away or what. But I think she'd be an excellent member who lives in an old stone house herself.
Oh.
Has quite interest there. So we'll let the board know or go through Lindsay what's going on, but certainly if anybody else has any other suggestions, by all means bring this forward.
Fraser, is there anybody that's on the Historical Society that you think might be interested in?
I can canvass our members.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll get back to you.
One thing I find kind of strange, we had all these people show up from the first group,
Yeah.
nobody from the second.
No?
Everybody got a,
So we did send out through mail based on the, we do have the taxes and all the other information, a letter. And then Caitlin and I did go to each door, not hand delivered, but did
No.
drop off in any mailbox or any door that we could for these 5. So again, we will continue to reach out, to provide notice of the next meetings in order to keep in the loop in case they decide to show up or got lost in the mail or blew away in the wind, but hope to do
Yeah.
everything we can to hopefully provide them an opportunity to speak to their property and provide the committee with some feedback.
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have any new business that they would like to bring forward? No? Okay, there's no media here. Item 8 is adjournment. I have a recommendation that the Prescott Heritage Committee meeting be adjourned. The time is 6:01. Do I have a motion and a seconder? Lee? All in favor?